Welcome back to the shop, everyone. In this video, I'm going to show you how I made the drawer boxes for this vanity. The approach that I used is heavily based on the approach that my good friend Ramon Valdez uses for his drawer boxes. Stick around and I'll show you more. I typically use maple drawer boxes with dovetail joints. In the past, I would have made the drawers like the one shown here. The bottom panel is fastened inside a groove that I machine in all four boards that make up the drawer. This approach works, but it can be difficult to get the bottom securely glued into the grooves to make a rock-solid drawer that won't rack. Ramon uses a different method to make his drawers, and I've adapted his method with the sample drawer shown here. The bottom of the drawer is secured in grooves that I've machined in the side panels, and it's glued down on the front and the back. This makes a very sturdy drawer that resists racking, and I find it to be easier to construct as well. Ramon has been using this method for decades, so it is certainly tried and tested. I highly recommend that you watch Ramon's video since he highlights a number of advantages to his approach over more typical drawer methods. In Ramon's video, he uses rabbet joints at each of the corners. I wanted to adapt Ramon's method using dovetails, as you can see here. My normal dovetail layout has a half pin at both ends, but as you can see here, the dovetail layout is a little bit different. For the drawer runners that I'm using, I need a 1/2 inch between the bottom of the bottom panel and the bottom of the drawer. So I've got that here. And then I've also got the bottom panel, as you can see here. So this first pin needs to be above the bottom panel. And so I've drawn a line on here, and then I lay out the dovetail so that I've got, well, about a 1/4 inch above that. I've come up with a procedure to machine these dovetails here at the PantoRouter, and I'm going to go through all of the steps to show you how I did that. I've machined all the drawer stock to the same thickness, a little over 1/2 inch. I've cut it all to the same width, just over 6 inches, and I've squared off one end. I've not cut the pieces to length yet because I want to be able to do some test cuts at the end, and I may need to cut those off to dial in for a perfect fit. I've penciled in top on each of the boards just to be sure that I don't machine into this bottom section with any of the dovetails. And I'll give you a quick overview of the process, and then I'll go into more details a bit later. So I'm going to machine the tails on the left side of both of the tail boards, and then I'm going to machine the pins on the left side of both of the pin boards. And I'll do all of that with a single setup, and then I'll adjust the setup and I'll machine the tails on the right side of the board and machine the corresponding pins on these boards. And for the tails, I'm going to have the outside face. You can see I've penciled in outside on both of those. The outside will always be up on the PantoRouter. And for the pins, the outside will always be down on the PantoRouter. And that's important for everything to go together correctly. And I'll mention that more as we go through the process. For this 6-inch wide drawer stock, I'm going to use 3 of the dovetail templates, as you can see there. And I've got my dovetail bit in. And the other thing to note is for the procedure the way I'm doing it, the dovetail templates need to be oriented this way so that they're narrower as they go down. And as I get through more of the explanation showing you how I do the pins, you'll see why that's important. I've positioned the first dovetail template at kind of an arbitrary position to the right of center. And then what I'm doing is I'm adjusting the location of this fence back and forth until I've got about 1/2 pin. If I route this, I'll have about 1/2 pin here. So that sets this template location. With the fence locked in that location, I'll come over to the left-hand dovetail template, and you'll see that I've marked a pencil line for where the, I don't want to cut into this because this is where the bottom of the drawer is going to go. And as I mentioned earlier, I want to be about 1/4 of an inch up from there. So I've positioned this template to be about that 1/4 of an inch, as you can see there. And for the third template, I just split the difference here. It doesn't have to be exact. So I've just split it here so it's approximately in the middle of the two. And you can see it's not in the middle of the table here, or the template holder. I'm off by a bit, but that doesn't matter. All that matters is the position of these relative to the board and this fence. So I'm all set up to route. I've set the depth of cut equal to the thickness of the workpiece. I'm clamped in and I'm ready to route, and I'm just going to do a double check. So outside up, we're doing the left side of the board here. So the top here should be against the fence, and it is. So we're ready to route. I've finished routing the tails on the left end of both boards, so it's time to route the corresponding pins. In order to get the correct alignment between the pin and tail boards, I want to route the pins with the dovetail templates in the same locations, and I also want to leave the fence in this same location. I've used the tail board to pencil in the location of the pins, and you can see the half pin is what will be at the top of the board, and the full pin is about 1 inch up from the bottom. You can also see that the pins get narrower towards the underside of the board. That's the reason that the templates must be mounted this way, narrower as you go down. If I had the templates the other way around, I'd have to flip the pin board over like this. If I did that, the pins would be at the wrong location. The half pin that's supposed to be here at the top of the board would end up over here at the bottom of the board. You may think that I could shift this fence over to account for the difference, but if I did, it would still be very difficult to get the joint perfectly aligned. So with that explanation complete, I can set the depth of cut, and I can move on to routing the pins on the ends of 2 of the boards, as I mentioned earlier. I've previously made some test passes, and I've adjusted the height of the template holder so that I get a nice tight fit of the pins into the tail, so I can start routing. Here's where I am so far. I've got the opposite corners of the box machined, and I've got nice tight fitting dovetails. So now it's time to cut the pin boards to length, cut the tail boards to length, and machine the opposite corners. And when I do that, I need to maintain this section here at the bottom where I don't have a pin interfering so that I can machine in for the bottom of the drawer. The tail boards have been cut to length. I've switched back to my dovetail bit in the router, and I'm now ready to cut the tails on the opposite end of these boards. In order for the pin boards to come in from underneath on both ends of the tail board, I need to maintain this out face of the board up while I'm routing the tails. And I want this end to look just like this end. So I want the half tail, or the half pin, I should say, to be here. And I want a full pin about 1 inch up because all of the joinery for the bottom is going to occur at this spot. So there are a couple of ways that I can get the pins in the locations that I want them. I can shift all of the templates to the left so that the half pin ends up here, or I can shift the workpiece to the right by moving this fence so that this half pin ends up here. And I'm going to shift the fence to the right. How far right do I need to shift this fence? Well, I can work that out relatively easily, starting by putting the tailboard in the way it was when it was routed. And I know if the templates aren't moving, I know exactly that the tails or the pins will be routed in these locations. So I can pencil in on the aluminum those locations, as I've done here. I can now flip this board over and bring it to the front of the fence, and I can push it to the right, as you'll see I'm doing here, until I get alignment with the pencil marks that I've put on the table. And when I've done that, I know that when I route the opposite end of the board, let me just tighten down the fence here, I'll bring this across the way I want it. So I know that I'm going to route a half pin here because I can see the pencil lines exactly where the router is going to cut. So the half pin here, and I'm going to leave an inch here, which is what I want. I really want the same thing here on this end. So that's how far I can move the fence just by using the pencil lines. I've adjusted the fence and I've got my board clamped down and I'm ready to route those tails. And it's worth noting that since I'm going to route both the tails and the pins with the fence at the same location, it's not critical that movement. If I'm off by a millimeter or so either way, it's not going to matter because, as I said, the tails and pins are both routed using the same position, so it will fit together. The only thing will be that it may not be an exact match to this end, but nobody's going to notice if I'm off by a very slight amount. As long as the joint fits tightly, I'll be fine. With the second set of tails completed, I've switched to the straight bit so that I can route the pins, the opposite end pins. So I've already finished the pins. I call those P1. These are P2. And I'm going to route those pins without moving the fence, without moving the templates, and making sure that the inside is up. So the pin boards, the inside is up, the tail board, the outside is up, and this is ready to go. All four corners have been dovetailed and I've got nice alignment at the top here, so everything was set up nicely at the PantoRouter. The next step is to cut a groove on this side and on this side for the bottom panel, and I also have to cut away wood, cut a strip of wood off of the back and a strip of wood off of the front. And I'm going to do all of those operations at the table saw the same way that Ramon did it in his video. I'm going to use my table saw to cut the groove for the bottom panel, and I've sanded this and it's 0.35 inches thick. And I could set up with a dado stack, but there's some advantages to using this rip blade. This is an 1/8 inch or just under an 1/8 inch wide rip blade with a flat top. And I'll talk about the advantages. They'll become apparent as I do some more machining here. I've set my fence position so that this left side of the blade will cut just a 1/2 inch, leaving a 1/2 inch on the bottom of the drawer, the bottom of the drawer box, and that's needed for my Bloom drawer slides. I've cut the first groove in both tailboards, leaving a 1/2 inch at the bottom for my Bloom drawer slides. Now what I have to do is adjust the fence by pulling it towards the blade to increase the width of the groove to be 0.35 inches, which matches the thickness of the bottom panel. In Ramon's video, he shows using a spacer so that he can keep the fence in the same position. Since I'm only making 2 drawers, I decided I'm not going to make the spacer. I'm going to use a slightly different way to move that fence. And I'm going to have to move it a couple of times because my blade is just under an 1/8 of an inch thick and I need to get to 0.35 inches thick. So I'm going to have to make 3 passes. Here's the way that I'm going to move my fence. I'm using a dial indicator that's indicating off the side of the fence. I've zeroed the indicator at this position so I can return to this same position just by coming back to 0 on the fence. And I'm going to move the fence closer to the blade by the width of the blade. So I'm going to go about 100 thou until I get to the proper width for the bottom panel. And I've got a test piece here, which I will use to sneak up on that fit. And once I get the perfect fit, then I can run all the boards through. Okay, I've moved the fence a couple of times so that I've got a groove that is a snug fit for the bottom panel. So these boards are now complete. I'm now ready to cut the 2 pin boards. And if we look at the sample, you can see that the height of the pin board should match the height of the tailboard at the location of the groove. That's great because right now my saw is set up. The last cut that I made with the saw was this groove here. So all I have to do is raise the saw blade and cut the pin board, and it will be at this height. I don't want to make that cut on the pin board just yet, and I'm going to refer to the sample drawer to explain a little bit more. After I glue together the drawer, I'm going to need to add this front strip, which is what's going to be used to hold the clips for the drawer slides. And the height of this strip matches the height from the bottom of the groove. This is upside down, so I guess the top of this groove to the top of this piece. So if we look over here, this piece right here is what I need for this strip. And obviously I'm not taking it off the tailboard, I'm going to take it off the pin board. So if I make the cut at the pin board with the saw blade at this location, I'm going to get this board plus a little bit of offcut, or a little bit of material that I'm going to have to remove later. However, if I return my saw blade to the original location right here and cut the pin board, then the strip that I cut off will be this wide, which is the perfect height for this strip for the clips. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to return, using my dial indicator, I'm going to return the saw fence to the original position, make that cut to get the clip strip. It'll be the perfect size, it'll be the perfect length and height, and then I'm going to reset the fence to the final position, this position here, and I'll cut this pin board and the other pin board, and those will be cut to the correct height from here to here. You'll see what I mean in a second. I've raised the blade up to cut all the way through the drawer stock. I've reset my fence to 0 on the dial indicator, and I'll make the cut. As you can see, this offcut strip is exactly the same thickness as this. So this will work perfectly for the clips. And now I've reset the fence to 233 thou, which is the location I need so that when I cut the rest of the pin boards, or the other pin board and the original one, I'm going to be cutting even with this edge here. So everything will line up perfectly. If you got all the way through the video, here's what the drawers look like. You can see this is the tail board. You can see the groove that I've cut out for the bottom panel in the tailboard, and you can see the pin board. The height of the pin board goes to the top of the bottom panel, and then I've attached this small strip for the clips that are required for the undermount drawer slides. I flipped the drawer up to give you a better view. So here is the strip that was cut, and I've just glued that to the bottom. This is nice and secure, and I will attach one clip on each side for the drawer slides. And another advantage of this method is normally if I was making this with with grooves on all 4 pieces, meaning the pin board, I'd have to cut out a notch here for the slide. But because the back here, because it doesn't extend below the bottom panel, I don't have to cut that groove out. So that's another nice advantage of this. And here's the second drawer, which I didn't show making this, but because this one's a lot more complicated as far as the layout, but the concept is all the same. Just keeping track of the tail boards and the pin boards, and which side's out, which side's in, so that everything goes together. And the same idea, I've got grooves in the tail boards only. The pin boards are cut to the appropriate height. On the back, I don't need the clip strip. You can see it here. And on the front, I have attached the clip strip. So same idea as the other drawer. And these drawers are rock solid. I cannot twist them at all. They're perfectly flat. So these are going to work really well in the vanity that I'm making. And as far as the dovetail joints that I'm getting off of the PantoRouter, just look at how tight those joints are. These are... I can spin around, you can see them. These are as tight as I could get, perfectly aligned at the top. So everything worked extremely well using the PantoRouter. And it is now my go-to machine for any dovetailed drawers that I need to make. And this will be my go-to approach as well, with the pin boards cut so that the bottom extends right the full width of the pin board. Thanks for following along, everyone. I know that was a lot of detail in the video. I hope you got something out of it. If you've got any questions or comments, feel free to include them in the comments section, or you can also contact me on Instagram at Bedrosian Woodworks.